Hey there, welcome back to the channel. My name is Andrew Clark, and today we're going to be taking a look at the new Universal Audio Dream 65 Reverb Amp. So in this video, I just want to go over a bunch of the sounds. I want to show you how this pedal pairs with my pedal board and my pedals, how it pairs with different types of guitars, so the strap pickups with the humbuckers, stuff like that. And I'm also at the end going to compare it with my amp, even though it's not really a fair comparison, I'll still do that. And just so you know, I have it running directly into the back of my Universal Audio Apollo interface, and absolutely no effects, totally dry going in there. So it's completely unaltered, this is just the pedal. Okay, so let's get started. So I will set the volume about here. Everything else, let's put it straight up. I'm gonna keep the boost off, just so you can kind of get a feel for what it sounds like, pretty dry. We'll put a little bit of reverb on there. And I've noticed that this thing gains up pretty quick. So like I said, there's no other pedals or anything in there. It sounds like this. Now I'm not really gonna get into the output knob too much. There is plenty of volume here, plenty of output, so I wouldn't be too worried about that. But the volume knob is pretty sensitive, so if I crank it up, and you can keep going. Gets pretty gnarly pretty quick, right? Let's crank it all the way up. So there's a ton of gain from this, and that's without even engaging the boost whatsoever. I'm gonna bring the volume back down. I'll kind of do like an edge of breakup type thing while we go through the different speakers. The EQ is pretty powerful, so the bass and treble obviously do a lot, but the biggest changes you're gonna see is in the speaker selection. So right now I have it set on GB25, the red one, which I assume is just a greenback, and it's actually pretty dark. So in this case, I would probably bump the treble up. But let's go down to the Oxford. Actually, I'll do like a side-by-side so you can hear it better. So, so noticeably brighter. Let's go to the next one. This is my favorite speaker, so the EV12 here. I believe the Oxford is kind of the stock speaker that came in these 60s Fenders, but here's the EV12. So this is my favorite speaker of the 6 that are in here, and even though it doesn't really sound like my amp, it feels the most comfortable and at home for me and the closest to my amp. So we'll keep going here. I'll let you take a listen to the other ones here. I think this is like a 2-rock cab. So I go back. We'll keep going. Last one. Not a fan of that one. I'm sure the choice of speaker is going to be purely based on preference for a lot of you guys. They all sound good, but they just kind of all have their own thing going on. So you can, if you continue down, you can bypass all the speakers. So if you're pairing this with an amplifier or a cabinet, where you maybe are using the 4-cable method or something like that, then you can bypass the speaker simulation, which is super handy. I would say if you put it in front of your amp, I did try it, bypassing and putting it in front. It didn't sound good. It's not like it sounded like a Fender-y style overdrive. It really just kind of destroyed the sound. So for me, not my thing. Maybe it's yours, I don't know. But turning the speaker cab or speaker simulation off is more something if you're using that 4-cable method, or maybe if you plan on bypassing your head altogether and just using a real speaker cabinet. Okay, so I'm gonna just kind of keep it on my main speaker that I like the most, which like I said is the EV12, as we go through the rest of the settings here. So I have the reverb set pretty moderately. It actually, when it's off, it actually is, honestly, it's a great sounding reverb. And when I compare it to the Golden, it's actually super close. So I know it's not the same algorithm probably as they use in their Golden reverb pedal, but it's definitely close and it does sound really good. So I'll crank it up a bit. Sounds pretty great. I mean, there's plenty of reverb on tap. Realistically, you're probably gonna wanna set it moderately like most people do as like an always on effect. But if you were to crank it up, it still sounds great. Okay, so let's back off that, put it kind of where there's just a nice little tasteful amount, and we'll keep going through here. So the bass, if we turn this up a bit, okay, so we got a little bit of grit. We can roll the bass back. I'm usually rolling it off a little bit. I find when I'm playing just by myself, having a lot of bass is nice, but usually in the mix, you're gonna wanna roll that bass off anyways, because it just kind of gets in the way. So I like to roll it back a little bit there. And then the treble, pretty wide. So there's tons there. Now, something to remember is that these old deluxe amps didn't have a mid-range control, so there's no mid control on the pedal, obviously. And where we get our mids from is actually from the boost. So one of these, the lead mod, actually allows for a bit of a mid boost. And I'm not sure exactly where it is, because even with that mid boost, it still doesn't have like the same mid character as a lot of other amps or even my amp. But it is kind of cool. So let's just start with stock first, and we'll listen to the boost. Just kind of put everything flat for you. Actually, let's keep it, we'll keep it pretty clean so that we can hear what the boost is doing. So this is just the basic boost. Sounds pretty cool. This is actually my favorite boost to be using. So I actually set it pretty low, just kind of brings a little bit of flavor in, and then keep this low. And as like a pedal platform, you just kind of have that little tiny bit of breakup. It's honestly perfect. But let's take a listen to the lead mod here. So we'll go up to there, start with it off. So because of the way that this mod works, it actually gets really dark until you crank the boost all the way up. Specifically on this lead one, so you can hear it gets very dark, right? And the mids come up. So if you just want to have that mid boost, but you want that brightness, just crank the treble, and you can kind of get it back. But if we continue to crank it up, so you can hear that. Then we'll just go to the last one here, which is the D-Text mod. And same thing. This one I think is trying to do the Stevie Ray Vaughan thing, modded Fender amp thing. So it sounds like this, clean. And it immediately kicks in and you don't lose that brightness. And just remember, this is without even cranking that volume up. So if you want to kind of mix them together, so bring the amp volume up and then keep the boost in kind of the middle. You can get some pretty thick overdrive out of this thing. So it's pretty diverse in that sense. Obviously, you're only getting one amp out of here, where with something like the Strymon Iridium or the HX Stomp or the Walrus ACS1, you're gonna have the option to change between the different types of amps. But even just doing the one amp thing like this pedal does, you can hear that there's actually a ton of sounds that you can get out of here. And one thing I'm not seeing a lot of people talk about in their reviews of these pedals is what you can do with the app to change the way the foot switches work. So what you can actually do is you can make it so that it's always on, because obviously if you're using this as your primary amplifier, you're not turning it off during a gig or anything like that. So the on-off switch is just kind of pointless, right? Because it's going to stay on the whole time. So you can actually set it up so that instead this does reverb, or it does the vibrato, or it does the boost, or it does the switch between favorites. So you could have, let's say, 2 amp sounds on this one. So you could go between your main sound and your other one. And then over here, you could turn on and off your boost or something like that. So it actually becomes something pretty functional. And these features aren't just for sitting and turning knobs. You don't have to do that in a live scenario. So it's pretty cool. Okay, and one other thing, now this is something that I don't really use because I'm using other pedals for this, but there is a really cool sounding vibrato in here. So I'm just gonna tweak the pedal back to my regular settings here. And then what we can do is we can go into Alt here. So when we flick this up, it stays up, whereas if you were to flick down to store, it bounces back up. But if you flick it up to here, you now have engaged these secondary functions. So and like I said, you can actually map the on-off of that vibrato, which technically is tremolo, to one of the foot switches too. So if you want to be able to turn that on and off while also being able to toggle between 2 amp presets, you can totally do that. So now that I've shown you what all the knobs and switches do, I'm going to plug in my pedal board and show you how this thing can take pedals. Okay, so we've got the board plugged in now. These are all the settings I use with my normal amp, so I don't want to change anything. And yeah, so I would leave this on all the time, especially with a Strat. Alrighty, that sounds really good to me. That feels like the right amount of compression. So if I were to stack my regular drive on here, I'm not gonna go through what every pedal sounds like. This should give you a good idea though. Okay, so now I'm just gonna quickly plug in a couple of my other guitars just so you can take a listen if you don't play a Strat or something like that and wanna know what it sounds like. All right, so last but not least, I just want to show you what this sounds like compared to the amp. This isn't a fair comparison. This pedal is $400 or $500 depending on where you live, and an amp like this, it's gonna cost you $2,500 just for the head. And then I'm actually recording in an ISO cab that I built myself. And so I'm using a real speaker and a microphone, and that either takes a lot of time or money to build, or you need to be in a studio or somewhere else where you can crank up your amp really loud. So like I said, not a fair comparison, but just for the sake of doing it, I'm gonna show you what it sounds like. Okay, so the amp's up and going, and now we can switch back and forth between them. So A here is going to be the Dream, and when this goes over to B, it is switching over to my amp. So we've got A like this. So you can tell it's got a lot more mid-range, and I have spent a considerable amount of time trying to get them to sound close to each other, and they just don't. And that's because they're not trying to do the same thing. This is not a deluxe. So is it a direct replacement for the amp? No, of course not. But does it sound great and does it sound awesome? Yeah. So I'm gonna give you a few more sound samples just so you can kind of hear how an overdrive maybe reacts differently and a fuzz reacts differently. Okay, so I don't want to spend too much more time comparing these because it's just not realistic, right? This is not trying to sound like this Dr. Z amp. This is trying to sound like a deluxe, and I'm not going to go out and buy a deluxe to compare it. There's other things on YouTube that you can look at to compare back and forth. So that's going to be it for the video. I know it was a little bit of a longer one, so for those of you that stuck all the way through, I really appreciate you hanging out. Please make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit that like button as well. It really helps this video get in front of more eyes, and I'm doing my best to grow and hit that 1,000 subscriber mark. With all that said, I hope you have an awesome day, and I'll see you in the next one.